Chapter 16. Anatole had lately moved to Dólokhov's. The plan for Natalie Rostova's abduction had been arranged and the preparations made by Dólokhov a few days before, and on the day that Sonia, after listening at Natasha's door, resolved to safeguard her, it was to have been put into execution. Natasha had promised to come out to Kuragin at the back porch at 10 that evening. Kuragin was to put her into a troika he would have ready and to drive her 40 miles to the village of Kamenka, where an unfrocked priest was in readiness to perform a marriage ceremony over them. At Kamenka a relay of horses was to wait which would take them to the Warsaw highroad, and from there they would hasten abroad with post horses. Anatole had a passport, an order for post horses, 10,000 rubles he had taken from his sister and another 10,000 borrowed with Dólokhov's help. 2 witnesses for the mock marriage, Khvostikov, a retired petty official whom Dólokhov made use of in his gambling transactions, and Makarin, a retired hussar, a kindly, weak fellow who had an unbounded affection for Kuragin, were sitting at tea in Dólokhov's front room. In his large study, the walls of which were hung to the ceiling with Persian rugs, bearskins, and weapons, sat Dólokhov in a traveling cloak and high boots, at an open desk on which lay an abacus and some bundles of paper money. Anatole, with uniform unbuttoned, walked to and fro from the room where the witnesses were sitting, through the study to the room behind, where his French valet and others were packing the last of his things. Dólokhov was counting the money and noting something down. "Well," he said, "Khvostikov must have 2,000. "Give it to him, then," said Anatole. "Makarka, their name for Makarin, will go through fire and water for you for nothing." "So here are our accounts all settled," said Dólokhov, showing him the memorandum. "Is that right?" "Yes, of course," returned Anatole, evidently not listening to Dólokhov and looking straight before him with a smile that did not leave his face. Dólokhov banged down the lid of his desk and turned to Anatole with an ironic smile. "Do you know? You'd really better drop it all. There's still time." "Fool," retorted Anatole. "Don't talk nonsense. If you only knew, it's the devil knows what." "No, really, give it up," said Dólokhov. "I am speaking seriously. It's no joke, this plot you've hatched." "What, teasing again? Go to the devil." Said Anatole, making a grimace. "Really it's no time for your stupid jokes," and he left the room. Dólokhov smiled contemptuously and condescendingly when Anatole had gone out. "You wait a bit," he called after him. "I'm not joking, I'm talking sense. Come here, come here." Anatole returned and looked at Dólokhov, trying to give him his attention and evidently submitting to him involuntarily. "Now listen to me. I'm telling you this for the last time. Why should I joke about it? Did I hinder you? Who arranged everything for you? Who found the priest and got the passport? Who raised the money? I did it all. Well, thank you for it. Do you think I am not grateful?" And Anatole sighed and embraced Dólokhov. "I helped you, but all the same I must tell you the truth, it is a dangerous business, and if you think about it, a stupid business. Well, you'll carry her off, all right. Will they let it stop at that? It will come out that you're already married. Why, they'll have you in the criminal court." "Oh, nonsense, nonsense." Anatole ejaculated and again made a grimace. "Didn't I explain to you?" "What?" And Anatole, with the partiality dull-witted people have for any conclusion they have reached by their own reasoning, repeated the argument he had already put to Dólokhov 100 times. "Didn't I explain to you that I have come to this conclusion, if this marriage is invalid," he went on, crooking one finger, "then I have nothing to answer for, but if it is valid, no matter. Abroad no one will know anything about it. Isn't that so? And don't talk to me, don't. Seriously, you'd better drop it. You'll only get yourself into a mess." "Go to the devil," cried Anatole and, clutching his hair, left the room, but returned at once and dropped into an armchair in front of Dólokhov with his feet turned under him. "It's the very devil." "What? Feel how it beats." He took Dólokhov's hand and put it on his heart. "What a foot, my dear fellow. What a glance. A goddess, he added in French. What? Dólokhov with a cold smile and a gleam in his handsome insolent eyes looked at him, evidently wishing to get some more amusement out of him. Well, and when the money's gone, what then? What then? Repeated Anatole, sincerely perplexed by a thought of the future. What then? Then, I don't know. But why talk nonsense? He glanced at his watch. It's time. Anatole went into the back room. Now then. Nearly ready. You're dawdling, he shouted to the servants. Dólokhov put away the money, called a footman whom he ordered to bring something for them to eat and drink before the journey, and went into the room where Khvostikov and Macarin were sitting. Anatole lay on the sofa in the study leaning on his elbow and smiling pensively, while his handsome lips muttered tenderly to himself. Come and eat something. Have a drink. Dólokhov shouted to him from the other room. I don't want to, answered Anatole continuing to smile. Come. Balaga is here. Anatole rose and went into the dining room. Balaga was a famous troika driver who had known Dólokhov and Anatole some 6 years and had given them good service with his troikas. More than once when Anatole's regiment was stationed at Tver he had taken him from Tver in the evening, brought him to Moscow by daybreak, and driven him back again the next night. More than once he had enabled Dólokhov to escape when pursued. More than once he had driven them through the town with gypsies and ladykins, as he called the Cocottes. More than once in their service he had run over pedestrians and upset vehicles in the streets of Moscow and had always been protected from the consequences by, my gentlemen, as he called them. He had ruined more than one horse in their service. More than once they had beaten him, and more than once they had made him drunk on champagne and Madeira, which he loved, and he knew more than one thing about each of them which would long ago have sent an ordinary man to Siberia. They often called Balaga into their orgies and made him drink and dance at the gypsies, and more than 1,000 rubles of their money had passed through his hands. In their service he risked his skin and his life 20 times a year, and in their service had lost more horses than the money he had from them would buy. But he liked them, liked that mad driving at 12 miles an hour, liked upsetting a driver or running down a pedestrian, and flying at full gallop through the Moscow streets. He liked to hear those wild, tipsy shouts behind him, get on. Get on, when it was impossible to go any faster. He liked giving a painful lash on the neck to some peasant who, more dead than alive, was already hurrying out of his way. Real gentlemen, he considered them. Anatole and Dólokhov liked Balaga too for his masterly driving and because he liked the things they liked. With others Balaga bargained, charging 25 rubles for a 2 hours drive, and rarely drove himself, generally letting his young men do so. But with his gentlemen, he always drove himself and never demanded anything for his work. Only a couple of times a year, when he knew from their valets that they had money in hand, he would turn up of a morning quite sober and with a deep bow would ask them to help him. The gentleman always made him sit down. Do help me out, Fyodor Ivanitch, sir, or, Your Excellency, he would say. I am quite out of horses. Let me have what you can to go to the fair. And Anatole and Dólokhov, when they had money, would give him 1,000 or a couple of thousand rubles. Balaga was a fair-haired, short and snub-nosed peasant of about 27, red-faced, with a particularly red thick neck, glittering little eyes, and a small beard. He wore a fine, dark blue, silk-lined cloth coat over a sheepskin. On entering the room now he crossed himself, turning toward the front corner of the room, and went up to Dólokhov, holding out a small, black hand. Fyodor Ivanitch, he said, bowing. How d'you do, friend? Well, here he is. Good day, Your Excellency, he said, again holding out his hand to Anatole who had just come in. I say, Balaga, said Anatole, putting his hands on the man's shoulders, do you care for me or not? Now, do me a service. What horses have you come with? As your messenger ordered, your special beasts, replied Balaga. Well, listen, Balaga. Drive all 3 to death but get me there in 3 hours. When they are dead, what shall I drive? Said Balaga with a wink. Mind, I'll smash your face in. Don't make jokes, cried Anatole, suddenly rolling his eyes. Why joke? Said the driver, laughing. As if I'd grudge my gentleman anything. As fast as ever the horses can gallop, so fast we'll go. Ah, said Anatole. Well, sit down. Yes, sit down, said Dólokhov. I'll stand, Fyodor Ivanitch. Sit down, nonsense. Have a drink, said Anatole, and filled a large glass of Madeira for him. The driver's eyes sparkled at the sight of the wine. After refusing it for manners' sake, he drank it and wiped his mouth with a red silk handkerchief he took out of his cap. And when are we to start, Your Excellency? Well, Anatole looked at his watch. We'll start at once. Mind, Balaga. You'll get there in time. That depends on our luck in starting, else why shouldn't we be there in time, replied Balaga. Didn't we get you to Tver in 7 hours? I think you remember that, Your Excellency. Do you know, one Christmas I drove from Tver, said Anatole, smilingly at the recollection and turning to Macarin who gazed rapturously at him with wide-open eyes. Will you believe it, Makarka, it took one's breath away, the rate we flew. We came across a train of loaded sleighs and drove right over 2 of them. Those were horses. Balaga continued the tale. That time I'd harnessed 2 young side horses with the bay in the shafts, he went on, turning to Dólokhov. Will you believe it, Fyodor Ivanitch, those animals flew 40 miles. I couldn't hold them in, my hands grew numb in the sharp frost so that I threw down the reins. Catch hold yourself, Your Excellency, says I, and I just tumbled on the bottom of the sleigh and sprawled there. It wasn't a case of urging them on, there was no holding them in till we reached the place. The devils took us there in 3 hours. Only the near one died of it. Chapter 17. Anatole went out of the room and returned a few minutes later wearing a fur coat girt with a silver belt, and a sable cap jauntily set on one side and very becoming to his handsome face. Having looked in a mirror, and standing before Dólokhov in the same pose he had assumed before it, he lifted a glass of wine. Well, goodbye, Fyodor. Thank you for everything and farewell, said Anatole. Well, comrades and friends, he considered for a moment, of my youth, farewell, he said, turning to Macarin and the others. Though they were all going with him, Anatole evidently wished to make something touching and solemn out of this address to his comrades. He spoke slowly in a loud voice and throwing out his chest slightly swayed one leg. All take glasses, you too, Balaga. Well, comrades and friends of my youth, we've had our fling and lived and revelled. And now, when shall we meet again? I am going abroad. We have had a good time, now farewell, lads. To our health. Hurrah, he cried, and emptying his glass flung it on the floor. To your health, said Balaga who also emptied his glass, and wiped his mouth with his handkerchief. Macarin embraced Anatole with tears in his eyes. Ah, Prince, how sorry I am to part from you. Let's go. Let's go, cried Anatole. Balaga was about to leave the room. No, stop, said Anatole. Shut the door, we have first to sit down. That's the way. They shut the door and all sat down. Now, quick march, lads, said Anatole, rising. Joseph, his valet, handed him his sabretache and saber, and they all went out into the vestibule. And where's the fur cloak? Asked Dólokhov. Hey, Ignatka. Go to Matrina Matrevna and ask her for the sable cloak. I have heard what elopements are like, continued Dólokhov with a wink. Why, she'll rush out more dead than alive just in the things she is wearing. If you delay at all there'll be tears and papa and mama, and she's frozen in a minute and must go back, but you wrap the fur cloak round her first thing and carry her to the sleigh. The valet brought a woman's fox-lined cloak. Fool, I told you the sable one. Hey, Matrina, the sable, he shouted so that his voice rang far through the rooms. A handsome, slim, and pale-faced gypsy girl with glittering black eyes and curly blue-black hair, wearing a red shawl, ran out with a sable mantle on her arm. "Here, I don't grudge it, take it," she said, evidently afraid of her master and yet regretful of her cloak. Dólokhov, without answering, took the cloak, threw it over Matrina, and wrapped her up in it. "That's the way," said Dólokhov, and then so, and he turned the collar up round her head, leaving only a little of the face uncovered. "And then so, do you see," and he pushed Anatole's head forward to meet the gap left by the collar, through which Matrina's brilliant smile was seen. "Well, good-bye, Matrina," said Anatole, kissing her. "Ah, my revels here are over. Remember me to Steshka. There, good-bye." "Good-bye, Matrina, wish me luck." "Well, Prince, may God give you great luck," said Matrina in her gypsy accent. 2 troikas were standing before the porch and 2 young drivers were holding the horses. Balaga took his seat in the front one and holding his elbows high arranged the reins deliberately. Anatole and Dólokhov got in with him. Macarin, Khvostikov, and a valet seated themselves in the other sleigh. "Well, are you ready?" asked Balaga. "Go," he cried, twisting the reins round his hands, and the troika tore down the Nikitsky Boulevard. "Tpro! Get out of the way! Hi! Tpro!" The shouting of Balaga and of the sturdy young fellow seated on the box was all that could be heard. On the Arbat square the troika caught against a carriage, something cracked, shouts were heard, and the troika flew along the Arbat street. After taking a turn along the Podnovinsky Boulevard, Balaga began to rein in, and turning back drew up at the crossing of the old Konyushny Street. The young fellow on the box jumped down to hold the horses and Anatole and Dólokhov went along the pavement. When they reached the gate Dólokhov whistled. The whistle was answered, and a maidservant ran out. "Come into the courtyard or you'll be seen, she'll come out directly," said she. Dólokhov stayed by the gate. Anatole followed the maid into the courtyard, turned the corner, and ran up into the porch. He was met by Gabriel, Maria Dmitrievna's gigantic footman. "Come to the mistress, please," said the footman in his deep bass, intercepting any retreat. "To what mistress? Who are you?" asked Anatole in a breathless whisper. "Kindly step in, my orders are to bring you in." "Kuragin." "Come back," shouted Dólokhov. "Betrayed." "Back." Dólokhov, after Anatole entered, had remained at the wicket gate and was struggling with the yard porter who was trying to lock it. With a last desperate effort Dólokhov pushed the porter aside, and when Anatole ran back seized him by the arm, pulled him through the wicket, and ran back with him to the troika.